Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our Monday interview show. I could not be more thrilled to have a very special guest back here with us today, Dr. Rollin McCraty. He is the Director of Research at the Heart Math Institute. He is one of the most brilliant humans I have ever met, and yet incredibly heart-centered. Dr. Rollin and I was so privileged to work with Dr. Rollin on not only the writing of The Hidden Power of the Five Hearts, but also our Heart Aligned Meditation Study, which is featured in the book. Dr. Rollin, your work has changed my life. Thank you so much. And I hope through this book and through this channel here and to our amazing community, we also are able to help change the lives of many. So thank you so much, Rollin, for being here with us today.
Well, it's always a pleasure to hang out with you, Kimberly. And I share the same vision and hope that you do. I hope that your book reaches as many people as possible and helps lead people to their own inner wisdom of their heart, and helps them navigate this crazy world that we're currently living in with more ease, more grace, stress-free lives.
So I've been getting these questions on the podcast, Roland. Before we even dive in, people are asking me, well, how did you even come into this heart work? Why are you focusing on this now? And I reflect back when I was writing my last book, which was published in 2022, and I was researching, it was called You Are More Than You Think You Are. I came across a piece of research from you, Roland, and it was around the heart brain and some of the things that I'm writing about now. But I remember I'm getting goosebumps because here we are now. But it was this piece of research that I said, what? Why doesn't everybody know about this? Why don't people know that the heart is another brain? How do we not know that the heart is sending more messages to the brain? The implications of this for health and stress. And we're going about it from such a mental pathway. So that, Dr. Roland, took me on this pathway, taking the deep dive, eventually meeting with you and Doc and Dr. Deborah and Martin up at Heart Math. I write the whole story in the intro, taking a deep dive into the holy science by Swami Sri Yukteswar and seeing this real intersection in ancient culture and spiritual traditions and modern science coming into the heart. But it's just amazing how life unfolds, Dr. Roland, to where we are today, about to publish this book. You and I have gotten to do a research study together. We've gotten to hang out in person. This is amazing.
Where do you want to go? What do you want to
Yeah,
talk about?
exactly. So I'm going to read you. I want to take us into coming from you, who's done so much amazing science and research. I could go on and on about, the incredible aspects of this, but I'd love for people to hear from you a little bit more about heart coherence and how this really, from our hearts, the center of our being physically, energetically, how this really elevates, number one, our health, but also number two, these feelings of lightness and peace that we all want. So I'm going to read you one paragraph inspired by your work, Dr. Rollin, from page 27, and we can go from there. Coherence is the synchronization or the syncing up of systems within your body. You become a finely tuned machine where everything is working in its best. Coherence has to start with your heart, since it's the strongest biological oscillator or rhythm setter in the body. When you activate your heart's power, it creates more aligned communication between your heart, brain, and nervous system, and then facilitates better communication with the rest of the body. When your heart and brain are in sync, with your heart and brain in sync, your overall health and bodily efficiency improve significantly. So the heart, we're living in a world now, Dr. Rollin, where people are so focused on, fitness routines and better sleep and taking more supplements. And all of this can be important. But talk to us about why the central point of this whole coherence, the syncing up, starts right here in the heart.
Okay. And let's talk about that same question on two different levels, if we may.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
let's start with physiologically, the body. What's going on inside of our body? Now, I think most people probably just have an intuitive sense, Kimberly, that it's a good thing to be in sync.
Yes, yes.
That doesn't kind of make sense. Get in sync. We hear it all the time, right? Well, that's real and it's something measurable. So when we use this term coherence that you read, and coherence just really is a way of measuring how harmoniously are the different systems in our body working together or not. Working together is good, right? Harmonious interaction. The body's using a lot less energy to get a lot more done.
Right.
So when we're incoherent, physiologically, the different rhythms in our brain, body, nervous system, so on, we're wasting a lot of unnecessary energy. So I know a lot of people I hear from, Kimberly, talk about, God, at the end of the day, I just don't have the energy that I would like to have to do the things I enjoy.
Right.
Right. Or, whatever that might go on, just a lot of exhaustion, a lot of fatigue. But that's just one level. I mean, now over time, that is a huge impact on our health. Right. I mean, because especially when, like you're young, right? I'm an old fart now, um, but I got it. How many times when you get a little bit older do you say, I wish I had only known, right,
Right.
back then? So I'm hoping that your book and your messages can be that.
Well, you know what, Dr.
You know what
Roll?
I'm trying to say here, because it's the
Yes.
accumulation that zaps our life force and leads to health challenges. Because we tend, like, I know when I was your age, I'm resilient, I'm invincible, I'm bulletproof, more or less, was kind of an unconscious attitude. I mean, I did a lot of crazy things. I probably still would, but that's another story. Anyway, what am I trying to say here? Okay, so this is where we have to talk about emotions.
Exactly. Thank you, Dr. Roland. Because as I'm listening to you, a lot of people, including myself, come into the wellness path through physical things, right? I'm going
Yeah,
to eat better. I'm going to
right.
exercise more. But
Yeah,
your
and
work
that's
is showing,
and
wait,
that's all good. Nothing
yes,
wrong with that, right? But here's the thing: it's our emotions that run the show when we're
right.
talking about the activity and the coherence and the alignment with whether we're in sync or not. And let's bring in stress. I know that's not a word that's as popular these days, but it's
Oh, it is, Dr.
is
Roland.
it is
Everyone's
it
talking about
okay?
stress.
So what? But stress. Here's the thing: let's unpack what stress is. It's always an emotion.
Right.
It's just a word that's kind of safe. I'm stressed
Right.
out. But what are we really saying? You're not doing what I want you to, and I feel frustrated.
Yeah, I don't like this
Right?
traffic.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, it's like it used to be. Here's this interesting kind of thing. Surveys, still to this day, the number one source of stress typically is time pressure,
Mm,
which is literally defined as the feeling that I don't have enough time to get everything done,
mm,
or the feeling everything's taking too long. So
right.
I'm just clicking on
Right.
that to show that that's an emotion,
Right.
right? Right. But if we look under the hood of stress, it's frustration, it's impatience, it's anxiety, it's feeling overwhelmed, feeling emotion, emotion, emotion. Now, the reason that's so important is that, like I said earlier, emotion runs the show. It's what is at the high level of I'll say our anatomy, if I can say
Yes.
it that way. That leads to changes in the hormonal flow in our body, in the activity in our brain, in our nervous system. It's what runs the show.
Mm.
Well, a lot of people will say, no, it's thoughts. Well, no, it's not. And I can so easily prove that
Well, the
here in the
emotions
lab.
impact your thoughts.
Well, yes, but I don't want to get too down this rabbit hole because we'll miss the main point here. But there are schools of thought out there. They're outdated, in my opinion. That it's called the ABC model in some circles. That we perceive something, we have thoughts about it, then emotion follows that.
Right.
Well, that's true, but it's not far from the whole story. Most of our navigating the daily life is the other way around.
Yes.
Emotions happen faster than thought and then bias our thoughts. So it's a two-way dialogue and interaction. Yes, thoughts can evoke emotions, but far more often it's emotions that happen first, and then our thoughts are trying to justify what we already felt.
And that's because the amygdala and these parts of our brain, which are bringing in the past into the present, these
Oh
memories,
yeah,
these
that's a
wounds.
whole other process. Probably too deep to go into today, but just if people can just understand that.
Yes.
So what I'm saying here is if we can learn to become, first of all, aware of our emotions and our emotional diet, right? See, I'd be willing, and I know if we had people would be shocked at the end of the day if they could have a computer printout of all the emotions that went on and how many of those emotions were automatically ingrained habit patterns that
Yeah.
are depleting our life force, depleting our energy. So if we put 10% energy into understanding this and being aware of those and starting to take control of our emotional diet, 10% of what we put into reading labels on bottles and labels in the grocery store, the payoff would be hundreds of times greater than what you get from, reading labels. Now, I'm not saying that's bad or wrong. That's great. People should do that,
Oh,
but not at the expense of becoming aware of and taking charge of our emotional diet. And
well,
people
thank you
can
for
do that.
saying it that way, Dr. Rollin, because I've been working on my physical, food, nutrition, diet for years. And when I started doing this work, I couldn't believe how much more energy I had. And especially exactly what you were saying at the end of the day. I would almost quantify it. And, it's hard to quantify these specific numbers without measurables, but it was almost like 60 to 70% more at the end of the day instead of just sort of laying there like frazzled. I'm just like, okay, like let's go outside, let's look at the stars. Like all these amazing things are happening because to your point, all these ups and downs, there are all these stressors. My inability in the past to be more resilient and to be more centered was really taking a toll, even though I had a healthy diet and I was walking and exercising. So it's just, I've experienced it myself, Dr. Rollin. That's why I want everyone to know about this. It changes your life.
Yeah. Well, here's a kind of a classic, and you probably can't relate to this, Kimberly, but maybe a lot of listeners can. You've probably never gotten really angry about something.
Yeah, right.
Right. Where you just have one of those,
Where's my husband? Let's bring him in here.
where we have just a good old blowout, man. Then it feels good. I'm pissed off and I'm going to let everybody know it, right?
You left the socks on the floor again.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel a few minutes after that? Say
Exhausted.
Exhausted. So there's a good example that
Yes.
everyone can relate to of how emotions use energy.
Yes.
So it's, and I don't use the word positive and negative emotions in my writings, as you know. I use the word depleting or draining emotions or renewing and regenerative emotions.
Yes.
To get down to brass tacks reality of how they're affecting our physiology in our body.
Well, so first of all, Roland, it makes sense. And it feels like for everyone listening who says, well, I've been trying to work on my emotions for years. I've been seeing a talk therapist. I've been, reading this self-help book or this motivational program or whatever it was. Let's move a little bit into the how.
I'm so glad you said that because how we've heard for years, right? And all self-help gurus and philosophers and talk about the importance, and the science is really backing that up now of, that it's better to be, have more regenerative emotions in our emotional diet throughout the day, the week, the year, right? Well, how do you do that? That's always the missing thing. And that's where, well, I'm sure you've covered it in your book, right? But that's where the heart plays a role. As you already said, the heart sends far more information to the brain than the other way around.
Yes.
Well, the way to think of the brain in this context is that it's interpreting the signals from the heart, the body, but especially the heart, and then going through what's called a pattern matching process. We won't go into that detail here, but then the top part of our brain, our cognitive parts, are observing, monitoring those rhythms and those match or mismatches in the amygdala, as you talked about, and labeling it. So when you if you change the input to the brain from the heart, that has a huge impact on affecting our emotional experience, how we actually feel. I mean, after all, I know you and John, I hope John didn't, when he asked you to marry him or in your dating, say, I love you with all my brain, right?
No.
Yeah. And who would do that, right? I mean, don't we always say, I love you with all my heart?
Yes. Well, but then there's this part of society, Dr. Rollin, as you know, which has sort of relegated the heart to the sentimental, to the romanticized.
But that's incorrect.
Yeah. This practical power that
because we're still talking physiologically. There's part two we want to get to here, but
yes.
So physiologically, the heart is the primary source of rhythmic activity in the body, and the rhythms and patterns that send into the brain go to all major brain centers and have profound effects on our ability to think clearly, our ability to make good decisions, how we feel. Right. So we learn techniques like I'm sure you're talking about in the book. In fact, I know you are. I read a chapter way back when. That allow us, the heart math techniques that allow us to shift the rhythm of the heart into a coherent rhythm, which is sending a different signal to the brain that enhances our capacity to think clearly. It gets us in sync. So you can just think of the heart as the master conductor in the whole physiological systems. So when it's coherent and has a coherent heart rhythm, that pulls the other systems into synchronization. Or it's really an optimal state, we're talking about the physiology of optimal function, right? That's really what we're talking about.
And what blew my mind and my heart, Dr. Rollin, is when we did this heart aligned meditation study together, which incorporated the heart math research, it incorporated the heart math quick coherence technique, and built on it with some of the Yogananda's techniques and made this meditation. And we brought in these 30 people, and it was incredible to see in 4 weeks, there was a 29% increase in being able to get into that coherent state, and a 10% increase in resting baseline levels. And this practice, that the tract we were sending them, Dr. Rollin, was less than 8 minutes. So here's the other thing that blows my mind. We're talking about rewiring, shifting your life, shifting your health. And sometimes we're taught in society, it's such hard work when you're going about it from the brain, the mental pathway. But there's this power, and I've experienced it. I saw in our study, I've seen it in your work, that it's not going to take always the same amount of time you think it's going to take. You've been talking in talk therapy for 30 years, trying to, get past some of these emotions. There's something so different about the heart intelligence that blasts through patterns.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're shifting. Well, that's a rabbit hole. Maybe sometime on another show we can go down and get into the physiology.
Maybe just a little bit, Dr. Rollin, you could explain why we're breaking patterns in this nonlinear way, though, from the heart coherence.
Yeah, well, okay. All right. So let me try and see if I can.
I know, it's like each one's a huge rabbit hole.
To really unpack that, I would have to connect all the dots and all the science behind it, but that I don't think would serve everybody. So there's a part of the brain called the amygdalas. There's one on each side. And here's what the amygdalas do functionally is they determine what is familiar or not familiar. And there are different parts of the amygdala doing that from the body's internal sensory systems, called interoception, big word. But it's also doing that from all the sensory systems of the external world, what we see, hear, smell, touch, etc. Familiar or not familiar?
Threat or not threat?
Well, okay, depends on the past. Okay, so to determine familiar or not familiar, you have to have an internal reference, and that's the histories, the past.
Right.
That forms what's called a familiar baseline reference, that the brain is, for all the internal and external, always comparing current inputs to the baseline. And we form many baselines and familiar patterns as we mature through life. Familiar, not familiar. So if you have, let me give you an example. I had one of my grandmothers, I tell the story a lot because it's such a good way of expressing it. When I was a little kid, the grandkids would come over, and she drove us absolutely crazy with her worry and anxiety. Worried about everything. Don't climb the tree, you'll fall and break your arm, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, what I come to understand in her past life experience, growing up through the depression and
yes,
war and all this, anxiety and worry had become her baseline, her familiar.
Right.
So the key understanding here, Kimberly, is the brain wants a match to the now, the current, and the familiar. That's where we feel comfortable.
Even if it's an unhealthy.
Even if it's totally, and that's where most of the world is today.
Right.
Right? Because our baselines have been shifted to what technically I'd call a maladapted pattern.
Yes.
Right. So the brain's, and that's why there's so much that this explains why we don't like change, why we keep repeating the same, often negative patterns and habits.
Right.
Whether it's the partners we choose or, on and on it goes. So we have to interrupt those old unhealthy baseline patterns. Now, here's the key. One of my mentors, very, very famous man, Carl Pribram, who's considered by many actually the father of modern cognitive neuroscience, actually proved, right, that you cannot think yourself into a new baseline. You have to change the inputs from the body, especially the heart, because that's what the rhythms that the amygdala always see. You have to shift those, and that's why coherence is so powerful. If we just do heart-focused breathing, and you can just while you're driving, while you're, cleaning house, while whatever.
Focusing on putting your attention on your heart.
Yeah, and breathing through the area of the heart, a little slower and deeper, and finding that internal rhythm that's comfortable. So if we do that long enough, we're changing that neural signals going to the brain and to the amygdalas. When we do that often enough, over a few weeks, it becomes the new baseline. the new normal.
Wow.
Right. So, but the key is you have to change the input to the brain to do that. You cannot think yourself into it, at least not directly. So that's why these simple techniques are so powerful in transforming people's lives, because we're changing the baseline. And once we do that, then that becomes the new automatic, where the stressors, or the stress, emotional stressors, impatience, right? Sounds like a simple word, but it zaps so much of people's energy. Right.
Yes.
Those inner feelings, unconscious feelings of fear and anxiety and negative projections, all of that starts to get transformed. Once you set a new baseline, they don't feel comfortable anymore.
So,
Is that
Dr.
making
Rollin,
sense?
so when I've been doing our heart aligned meditation in the morning, and this is what we've heard back, is not even just a specific event like the traffic. I feel more resilient and calm, non-specifically through the day. So not
Right.
just the amygdala is recognizing this one stressor, but
Well,
it's
that's right. That's because your baseline has been changed.
baseline overall. That means as you
Yeah.
go through the day, whatever's coming into your email
Right.
or whatever person
Yeah.
says something, you're
Well,
naturally more resilient.
here's another way to think of this is that I'll use a metaphor here that once we have a baseline, and that's really kind of what then creates a lot of our attitudes.
Yes.
So then attitudes is where we tend to hang out a lot in our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Well, that's like an attitude, like we hear cynical, right? An attitude of cynicism, a cynical person, right?
I'm just laughing because my 8-year-old heard that word and he's like, I don't like your attitude. He says
Yeah, right.
it's a funny word. But it's a pattern. It's a real pattern.
It's a real pattern. So think of it like almost an unconscious but background music that's constantly playing in your consciousness.
Right.
Right. So that's coloring, biasing all of our perceptions, our thoughts, our emotions, and all this. And so that's really what I'm talking about, to start becoming more self-aware of. And it takes, you have to have the self-vulnerability, kind of look under the radar, and the self-honesty to say, okay, well, this is the music is really playing in here. Right. Once you do that, that's half the battle, because then you can make a choice to start turning that around. And changing that background music, change the station. Right. Does that make sense?
Well, what I've experienced to illustrate it in a personal example is, as I've done this work now, which has been a few years, I've noticed that certain people who shall remain unnamed, who used to bother me, or they say the things, how there's people that kind of like poke at you. They just,
like a button on your head. It's kind of fun to push it, watch them react.
but I don't feel those same reactions.
Yeah.
My attitude towards literally other people, your relatives or people that are just going to be in your lives, there's just this sense of deeper neutrality, like,
Yeah.
the zooming out feeling, which the heart gives me, which is just sort of saying, well, that's how, they communicate, or not taking it so personally. It's been transformative, Dr.
Well,
Rolla.
and that's you've taken your power back.
Yes. You go back to the hidden power, this power of staying peaceful around anyone, resilient.
Right. Yeah. We can't control others, but we can control and regulate how we react. Like being neutral. It doesn't mean you have to condone or agree with people's actions or behaviors, right? But we don't have to drain our energy in response to them.
Well, another thing too, Dr. Rollin, and this was one of the pieces of your research that's published in the book for anyone watching this, or if you're listening to this, this is on page 45 in the Dark Heart Incoherence chapter. This incredible figure, this graphic, which is showing the heart field emanating.
Yeah.
So many people, Dr. Rollin, want to change their lives, right? They may want to attract that partner or a better work situation or something out here. But one of the things that I've really come to understand, especially through your research, is energy doesn't lie. So besides how we feel the stress inside, which we think is only what we are sensing, other people are sensing this field. Can you talk a little bit about how this field is going beyond this barrier we think is the skin, and we don't stop here?
I'd be happy to. And then I want to go to part two of what I brought up earlier. Yeah. So when, to make it simple, when we stick electrodes on the body to measure the electrocardiogram, we're putting little electrodes across the chest, right?
Yes.
And it's called the electrocardiogram for a reason. We're measuring electricity, literally flow of current. So whenever, this is physics 101, I mean, we probably get taught this in grade school now, that whenever you have a flow of electrical current, you create what's called a magnetic field. Now, the thing about a magnetic field is that they go through things. That's why cell phones work indoors, right? It's the magnetic component that's going through the windows and the walls, and you can even be in an elevator and your cell phone at work, right? So if it wasn't for the magnetic field, that wouldn't be possible. So the electrodes don't see that field. They just measure the current flow. So there's another device that we need to measure that field, and it's called a magnetometer, right? And it's the
Yes.
same kind of field we all live in, the Earth's magnetic field. We all live in these fields, right? The reason I know this is I can stick a probe out here at this magnetometer and measure it, from anybody, right? If we have a beating heart, we have a magnetic field. Now, what our research added to this was well known before I came along. In fact, this goes back to being measured in the late 1800s, right? The external magnetic field to the body. But what we were able to show using, I used to be a communication engineer for Motorola, by the way. So using the same techniques that we would use back in the old days, if I can say it that way, to decode or look at the information being carried by the field, whether that's your cell phone or any radio transmitter, applied that to the field of the heart. And lo and behold, we were able to show that the field is carrying information about our emotions. I'm sure it's a whole lot more information, but for sure about our emotions. Just like our cell phones using the field to carry our voice or our text message or the picture, right? We're encoding that in that field.
So specifically our emotions. And again, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of thoughts, but emotional energy.
For sure, emotions that we've published in peer-reviewed journals and proven this. So we're radiating. In other words, what we feel, whether we're aware of it or not, or whether we put on the plastic smile, even if we might be upset, right?
The fake, yeah.
Face, right? Those emotions don't stop at the skin. We are literally broadcasting them. We're like radio transmitters.
Amazing.
Okay, so part two, well, guess what? We're also exquisitely tuned receivers of these other biologically generated fields. Nature built us that way to not only radiate, but to be tuned to the frequency and amplitude of the field generated by other people or other living systems.
Yes.
So we were able to show this, that when people, that there's I'm going to use the word energetic, an energetic communication through the field interactions. It's always going on between people, when they're in groups or, with husbands and wives or friends or work teams, whatever. That is unseen. Now, for a lot of people, it's unconscious, but it's still having measurable effects and affecting our perception, right? So it's one of the big factors in miscommunication,
right?
Because our nervous system is receiving and detecting these fields and going, oh, they're radiating, I don't know, something that isn't matching what they're saying,
right?
And that creates a mismatch, right?
Isn't it true, Dr. Rollin, though, for people that feel really sensitive to people's energies or, again, bothered, as you increase your coherence, you may register people being in a bad mood, but you don't have to be as affected.
That's exactly right. So when we're coherent, we're more stable. We're not going to be as affected by other people's vibrations. I'm going to use vibrations because that's literally what we're talking about now. But we're also more sensitive and aware of the information in the field simultaneously.
We're more intuitive.
We're more, I call that energetic sensitivity. It's one of the 3 types of intuition. Absolutely.
What are the other types of intuition?
Well, actually, implicit knowledge is one, and then the other I call non-local. And that's our intuitions about things that are maybe in the future or far away. You can't explain through these field interactions.
Got it.
Right. And I know you know exactly what I'm talking about here.
Yes.
And it really kind of ties in. So the non-local ties into the second part of the heart. Because Kimberly, you probably know this, but one of the things we've heard over the years and still to this day from people who start practicing the coherence techniques, getting the heart and brain in sync, is that their intuitions feels like it's on steroids. Right. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's a radical change for people. It's not so subtle in a lot of people. Not everybody. It depends on how sincere they are. And then the second thing they usually say, Kimberly, is synchronicities have become a way of life. And I know that's true for me.
It's true for me, Dr. Rollin. And also, it just doesn't feel like, we talk about these different fields of reality. It doesn't feel like you have to push so hard. You're trying to
Yeah,
make things happen. You're drawing things
yeah,
in. People are showing
exactly.
up. It's just this
It's a
flow.
flow, right? Because we're
Yes.
in that coherent, in sync with not only with, well, we're actually in sync with our own, what I call it, larger self. Now, a
Yes.
lot of people, would call it, your higher self, or I'm in touch with my soul or my spirit. But that's really what's going on. So what I'm suggesting here, Kimberly, is that we are multidimensional beings, and that we really do have, well, I'll say it this way: we have two hearts: the physical heart, which is the first part of our discussion, and then the energetic heart, which has also been called the spiritual heart in a lot of
Yes.
philosophical and religious traditions for thousands of years. Well, I'm just suggesting that's real, the energetic heart. And at the energetic heart, it's in touch with all the DNA. It's like a radio transmitter from it
Mm.
to the DNA. It's where the real blueprint for who we really are exists. It's that bridge between our humanness, our physical bodies, and our larger self.
Mm.
So this is the big game of coherence. I mean, yes, there's all the health and performance benefits, be a better golfer, tennis player, be
Yeah.
healthier, live longer. That's
Focus.
all true.
But this is it.
But
This is the good stuff.
this is the big game. This is where we start to, when if the energetic heart is that bridge to our larger self, our soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it, coherence opens that channel. So that's the intuition. So intuition in this context is the flow of information from it's part of our own undivided wholeness, part of our us, right? It's just that higher dimensional part of ourself that allows the flow of information to come down into the heart, mind, brain system. So now we're starting to make our choices that are in alignment or in alignment with who we really are, and our real purpose and what we're meant to
Mm.
do here on earth, at least this lifetime. Does that make sense? I mean,
And then we could say, Dr. Roland, that like incoherence, this sort of friction would create that irritation with others, this
yeah.
unkindness. And so do you believe as we open this channel to who we really are, kindness
Well,
and
it's the natural expression,
care,
kindness, compassion,
compassion is the
gratitude.
natural part of who we
Yeah.
are?
Yeah. So I talk about, in fact, I'm developing a new course right now. I'll be teaching through the Shift Network later this year. And for class one, I'm going into what I call the spectrum of love.
Mm.
So if you think of love like an octave, like you could think of it as a musical octave that has different frequencies within that octave. Compassion is high up on vibratory within the spectrum of love. Gratitude, appreciation, kindness, respect, higher dignity. These are all frequencies within that love spectrum. And they exist in our wholeness at the higher
Wow.
dimension. But when we're out of sync with our larger self, right, then we're kind of just left to feel from the mind, and in what a lot of people would call 3D consciousness, right? So that's where we so much of our emotional experience is anxiety and frustration and judgment and separation and blame.
Comparison.
I mean, blame is so, it's really funny well, not funny. It's not funny at all, because it's one of the big factors that zaps our life force and
Blame.
our energy.
Victim.
But it's so normal, we don't even perceive it.
Wow.
How much, if you think about it, and I just went through another round of this myself, getting a little bit deeper. Blame the weather, right? It's still blame. It's putting, in our reactions to it.
It's amazing, Dr. Roland, because it's going to the same place, right? And it's like some people show up on a yoga mat and some people are looking for stillness or they're looking to connect. Some people want good abs. But as they show up on the mat, they're getting these different benefits. And you're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this. I was trying to go in for better performance, but I'm starting to feel so peaceful and light.
Yeah.
And it's just like this onion centered in the heart.
Yeah. Well, right. As we connect with our larger self, right? So actually a little trick that is, a lot of people, inner stillness, right? Inner peace. Well, actually, that's something when you're doing heart focused breathing, it's kind of a next step. Like with quick coherence that we used
Yes.
in your study, you can, self-activate feelings of appreciation or care or
Yes.
kindness, but you can actually also breathe inner stillness.
Mm.
So, I mean, a great practice I would recommend is breathing. When you're doing heart focused breathing, breathe in the feeling of inner stillness, inner
Beautiful.
peace, and then breathe out love.
Well, our society, Dr. Rollin, is so, linear. Like we got to work harder, we got to compete. And what you're suggesting and what the research shows is when we are in kindness and the heart starts to awaken and it's broadcasting out, we become more magnetic in that sense where people want to listen to us or they
Yeah,
want to help us. And so
exactly.
it actually is practical. It actually works better to be kind and to be loving.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's certainly good for our own health and wellness,
Yes.
but it's actually, you're absolutely right. It's putting that field out that others are, even if it's unconsciously sensing. So if you're radiating a coherent field, others tend to trust you more,
Right.
right? They tend to kind of like you more. I mean, we all know this, Kimberly. I mean, for God's sakes, we have sayings in our language. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife in that room, right?
Well, let me ask you something, Dr. Rollin. What if someone's naturally loving and kind? Are they naturally coherent? Or can there be other parts of their life where they're stressed out
Well,
about,
sure there can. I mean, and that's going to be true. We all have our own individual, I'll say, blueprints
right?
for our life and things that we have to work on to grow in the evolution of our own consciousness, right?
So this journey, these practices, the quick coherence, which is part of the heart aligned meditation, and these other practices, what I've noticed is, they keep growing and growing. But for someone listening to this who's just starting out, you can just spend a few minutes in there, and it really does work. There's a consistency, but I'm not talking about like hours a day, like some of these
Right.
other practices. It's just like this baseline grows even just from a few minutes.
Well, you got to breathe anyway,
Right.
right? But why not be a little more conscious about it and do heart focused breathing? Like I said, it's something you can do while you're driving. You can do it while you're in a meeting and do it right now. We're on this Zoom call. Nobody needs to know you're doing it.
And Dr. Roland, being on the journey for this many years, it just keeps unfolding. There isn't like a ceiling, like I'm coherent here. I mean, there's this unfolding of this
Uh,
energetic, spiritual, incredible heart. It doesn't stop.
Absolutely. I mean, it's you use the onion skin analogy, but I'd say another way of saying that is we spiral up to the next notch in the evolution of our own consciousness while we're
And
here on Earth, and life becomes a lot more adventuresome, a lot more fun, and a lot more peaceful. Right? I would say I can say this from my own personal experience, but a lot of my colleagues and friends, that as we connect with our larger self and we really start getting more in sync with it, it's starting to be the master of our decisions and how we run our life. I would say one of the things that has been huge for me is true, true understanding and self confidence that I really know that I can handle whatever comes my way.
mm,
Right. So that kind of pretty much eliminates, fear, anxiety, negative projections of the future. I mean, it's going to happen anyway. It's going to be tends to be more flow. Life has a better flow when we're more coherent and aligned. But, we still have our challenges. It doesn't mean that, the birds are going to sing and the flowers grow and then we never have stressors in life as we
yes,
have everyday life. But we certainly can meet those with a greater sense of that, okay, to deal with it and move on.
right. That's so beautiful, Dr. Roland, is that inner security where so much of the stress is, I don't want this to happen, or what if this happens? The other thing that I've noticed, Dr. Roland, is it's not this perfect, transition up. I'm working on coherence, and there's times the old triggers come in,
Yeah.
but the difference is I don't stay in them as long
Right.
and they don't happen as often. So I
Yeah.
do see this upward trend. We're just more resilient, but it's not like we're going to be perfect. Sometimes I do get in that argument with John, with my husband, or I complain about his dirty socks. I'm like, I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, right? There's these deep patterns and we're working on them,
That's right.
but it does trend up.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I say think of it in spirals up to the next notch. And then you stabilize and then the spiral of the next notch.
Yeah.
And that
But
takes
there's not
time.
like, it's not like, oh, one day I'm coherent and I have all the, I'm completely different. I
Yeah.
see things differently, but some of those patterns, Dr. Roland, whether the amygdala or whatever it is, like from our childhood or really deep wounds, the heart works in its own way. It doesn't happen
That's right.
always overnight.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's about ratios is the way I like to think of it.
So the ratio for coherence makes more
Yeah, we're
peace.
increasing the ratio. It's not about, in fact, trying to be perfect. That just keeps you stuck in the head, in the mind,
Yeah.
right? And can the downward spiral.
Well, the potential for this work to just have an incredible impact on the planet, Dr. Rollin, yes, from the health perspective, but also the unity that's needed so much on the planet within ourselves and with each other. I mean, there's so many implications to this heart work, the kindness, the compassion, the clarity, the ability to work together. I mean,
Right.
it just
Get along.
any is there anything else we didn't talk about, Dr. Rollin, that you
Oh,
would
there's
really
so
want?
much we haven't
I
talked
mean,
about. But
listen,
yeah.
we could have like a 100-part series to this heart work. We would still have things to talk about. Um, and thankfully, in the hidden power of the five hearts, Dr. Roland, there's so much. There's so many direct quotes from you. There's so many of your actual research studies referenced in the back. So I'm so honored to have this guide as a little, a real tidbit, a pathway in. But for today, Dr. Roland, anything from your heart you want to share?
Well, I can't wait to get my signed copy of your book. And no, I would, yes, I would just really invite anybody who might be listening to you just pause throughout the day and
Mm,
maybe just kind of do a tune in. What am I really feeling? And a way that you might think of that is ask yourself, what am I feeding the field?
yes.
Am I feeding the field the vibrations of maybe anxiety or fear or hopefully not hate, right? Or these types of lower vibrations. And if you find it yourself, maybe that, you're a little anxious because your to-do list isn't getting done fast enough or something, or you're frustrated or impatient, just take some breaths through the heart, do heart focused breathing and draw in with each breath a feeling of patience
Mm,
or kindness, right? Or acceptance, whatever the right offsetting frequency might be. And then feed that into the field. Let's broadcast that to the world. We
wait.
didn't even get into how it not only affects our own health and well-being and the field affects others, but it's also affecting the planetary field. That's a story for another time.
Well, that's the empowering part about this is that we really can do something about the fragmentation and the separation we see in the world. We're all part of it. But can you review once again, Dr. Roland, as we close up here? Because if people are saying, well, that heart focused breathing sounds so simple, how's that really doing anything? This breathing through the neurons and the networks in the heart, in your terms.
It's just really simple. I mean, the steps of heart both, you don't have to know all the science stuff. Yes, it is doing all that, but it's really simple. You just focus your attention in the area of the heart or the chest area. Okay. Imagine your breath is flowing in and out of that area and breathe a little slower and deeper than normal and find a rhythm that's comfortable that you can sustain, for a minute or 3 minutes
Yes,
in practice.
it really
And then,
works.
and then as step two, as you get the rhythm, you'll find your own natural, what's called resonant frequency by doing that you settle into. And then step two is start to draw in maybe a replacement feeling or attitude for that was draining your energy or causing you stress.
It really works. It's so powerful. But for the discerning mind out there that's like, well, from a scientific perspective, we can just say simply, this is helping to change your the syncing up between your brain and heart communication.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's doing much more. I mean, these are all studies. There's over 500 published studies now on the effect of these techniques, hormonal balance, right? The activity in our brain and nervous system, our ability to make better decisions. I mean, kids get
Yes.
better test scores in school. I mean, it just goes on and on. The heart's doing less work, getting more done. And what's called ejection fraction goes up. I mean, there's just so much. Blood pressure goes down, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, Dr. Roland, I could speak with you forever. I want to thank you so much for um oopsie, we'll edit that out. I want to thank you so much just for this incredible work you are doing, you've continued to do, the fact that you've dedicated your life to heart awakening on the planet. And it's
Late, and they're not going to leave me alone here. So,
okay.
yes,
Uh,
I'll be there shortly.
sorry, Dr. Roland. It was me that ran over.
You
Dr.
want to
Roland, thank
you
you.
want to do that over again?
Yes. Dr. Roland, I want to thank you so much for your incredible work, the work you continue to do, the fact that you've dedicated your life to heart awakening on the planet. I can say for myself, one life, one heart has dramatically changed. I know many, 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 many hearts are changed from your work. So thank you so much, Dr. Rollin. I appreciate you so much.
Well, back at you, Kimberly, and I appreciate you getting the word out to so many people, especially the younger audiences. And I know you have a lot of the women that follow you, and I think that is so awesome, because you naturally have a way of helping open hearts. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rollin. And everyone, The Hidden Power of the Five Hearts, featuring Dr. McCraty's work, our Heart Aligned Meditation Study, and so much more. You can check it out now everywhere books are sold. Also, mysaluna.com/5heartsbook. And we have direct links to Heart Math as well. We'll put in the show notes at mysaluna.com. We'll be back here Thursday, as always, for our next Q&A show. Thank you so much for being part of our community. Sending you so much love from my heart, Dr. Rollin's heart, right to yours.
Take care, everyone.